Sionagad, welcome to Cherokee Stories. I'm your host, Phil Bange. If you'd like to be interviewed and tell us your story, your family history, to add to our Cherokee history, please email us at cherokeestories@hotmail.com. Today we're going to read Cherokee Vision of Elohi. The Elohi. When we lived beyond the great waters, there were 12 clans belonging to the Cherokee tribe. Back in the old country in which we lived, the country was subject to great floods. So in the course of time, we held a council and decided to build a store reaching to heaven. The Cherokees said that when the house was built and the floods came, the tribe would just leave the earth and go to heaven. We commenced to build the great structures, and when it was towering into one of the highest heavens, the great powers destroyed the apex, cutting it down to about half of its height. But as the tribe was fully determined to build to heaven for safety, they were not discouraged to commence to repair the damage done by the gods. Finally, they completed the lofty structure and considered themselves safe from the floods. After it was completed, the gods destroyed the high part again. Then the tribe held another council and concluded to move out of the floody country and hunt one more dry and suitable to their liking. So, they journeyed for many days and years and finally came to a country that had a good climate and was suitable for raising corn and other plenty upon which the tribe subsisted. Other red tribes or clans to the Cherokee tribe began to come also from the old country. The immigration continued for many years, never knowing that they crossed the great waters. In the course of time, the old pathway which had been traveled by the clans was cut by the submergence of a portion of the land into the deep sea. This path can be traced to this day by the broken boulders. This was of no surprise to the clans, as they were used to the workings of the floods. Long years after they had settled in their new homes in the new country, they began to hunt for the clans of the Cherokee tribe. After a fruitless search for the others, finally gave it up and established a new system of 7 sacred clans to the tribe. From that day to this, they have been searching for the 5 lost clans of the Cherokee. After this, the Cherokee settled down and organized a government and a religious system of worship. This worship consisted principally of certain rites which were intended to teach the more intelligent the true nature of the heavenly bodies or powers and the laws by which they govern themselves and their younger brethren, the lower planets and their children, the sons of men. After this was done, and the tribe began to prosper in a more favorable climate and a richer soil, where an abundance of corn was raised and game was plentiful, a new difficulty stared them in the face. A strange race of men crossed the great waters and landed warriors who began to attack the Cherokee tribe. The Cherokees called in all the clans and began to destroy the enemy, with the exception of a few prisoners who they saved. These prisoners were placed in canoes and sent back across the water which they had previously crossed. They were told to report back to their own country what great warriors the Cherokees were. Then, in a few more years, another fleet of warriors came across. The broad waters were literally black with the innumerable hosts armed with bows and arrows. They landed on the shore and began murdering the Cherokees. But the tribe again called in all the clans and began to defend themselves with their war clubs, slaughtering the foreigners by thousands, day and night, having given one another the sacred word that they would not eat or sleep until the last enemy was destroyed. They were again victorious and conquered the invaders. The Cherokees then organized a little hell of their own, and having instructed the women and children to gather great quantities of pine resin, they covered and set fire to them and burned off the feet of the captives. And while still burning, they placed them in their boats and canoes, and they were told to go home and report that what great warriors the Cherokees were. Then the Cherokee tribe became uneasy, as most of the clans were a long ways from the scene of the great land of blood. So the warrior clans consulted the wise men of the tribe to see what the next move on the part of the enemy would be. These 7 wise men, one from each tribe, then called all the clans together, and they held a council of wisdom at the half-sphere temple. The wise men ordered the 7 clans to dance around the round or half-sphere temple for 7 days and nights. When the 7 days' dance commenced, the wise men entered the door of the temple in which there was no light, as the light radiated from the wise men was sufficient to illuminate the interior of the temple. At the close of the 7 days' dance, one of the wise men came out of the temple in the form of an eagle. This eagle formed 7 gyrations as it ascended into the heavens. After the eagle had performed the 7th spiral evolution and disappeared into the 7th heaven, the clans broke up and went home, leaving the other 6 wise men in the dark temple, which was lit up by the psychic or spiritual light only. The wise men then came home, and after consulting the Akakate, told the people that these warriors would not come any more for 7 years. Then the Cherokees trained their young men for war, and all the 7 clans were notified of the fact. When the warriors came again across the great waters, they were fully prepared to meet them again. These warriors came by the thousands and thousands, but they had to resort to some other scheme besides depending upon their war clubs, fell upon the idea of using poison in their wars with the terrible invader. They then sent some great warriors out to kill the great and terrible 7-rayed serpent and get its poison, which they did, and placed the liquid in cymblings. At the close of the 7 years, the dark, terrible warriors crossed over like locusts in numbers with boats and loaded with poison and arms, thousands and thousands. When the enemy arrived, the Cherokees and all their clans came in with their war clubs and the cymblings filled with uokatine poison. Running near the lines of the enemy, they shook their gourds of poison, and spilling the poison near them, they kept on one after another, whooping as they went. The Cherokees sat at right angles to the first run, and decoyed the enemy to follow. When the invader came to where the poison was spilled, they fainted and fell down. The Cherokees then came up and slaughtered them by the thousands and thousands. The defeat discouraged the dark invader, and the war from that source ceased. The Cherokees then lived for ages in peace, and a knowledge of the war with the dark invader became the course of time only a story. When the enemy arrived, the Cherokees and all their clans came in with their war clubs and the cymblings filled with uokatine poison. Running near the lines of the enemy, they shook their gourds of poison, and spilling the poison near them, they kept on one after another, whooping as they went. The Cherokees sat at right angles to the first run, and decoyed the enemy to follow. When the invader came to where the poison was spilled When the invader came to where the poison was spilled, they fainted and fell down. The Cherokees then came up and slaughtered them by the thousands and thousands. The defeat discouraged the dark invader, and the war from that source ceased. The Cherokees then lived for ages in peace, and a knowledge of the war with the dark invader became, in the course of time, only a story. Their ancient worship of the wise ones of heaven was kept up. This worship was organized at a time that was beyond the memory of the wisest of the Cherokee tribe. It was only reorganized in the new country as the ancient religion. The people lived for ages in peace and happiness. After this living for ages in peace and prosperity, the Cherokee tribe increased greatly in population. They built the Katihis throughout the 7-clan nation. After this living for ages in peace and prosperity, the Cherokee tribe increased greatly in population. They built the Katihis throughout the 7-clan nation, organized on the broad principle of universal brotherhood, which included the whole earth except the 5 lost clans. Then it happened. While the Cherokee tribe thus lived in their new country, that strange white canoes appeared on the broad expanse of great waters. The clans gathered on the shore in wonder and astonishment at the revival in their waters of these strange vessels. These white canoes hovered in sight for several days, as though not confident that they would be received with welcome by the tribe. The clans, thinking they were beings from heaven, began to beckon to them to come to the shore. The clans also prepared corn in which was cooked sweet nuts, venison, and other prepared food to be presented to these white beings in their canoes. White being an emblem of purity with the Cherokees, they looked upon these white beings as a pure race from the upper world. The white beings of the white canoes were soon convinced that no harm was to be expected, and they landed. The strangers were received with welcome by the tribe, and food was brought in and given them. The strangers were received with welcome by the tribe, and food was brought in and given them. Tobacco, which had been purified and called the cola of peace, was also brought, together with pipes, and the strangers were asked to smoke with the clans. Then the white strangers, which were Tobacco, which had been purified and called the cola of peace, was also brought, together with pipes, and the strangers were asked to smoke with the clans. Then the white strangers, which were supposed to be visitors from heaven, and who were supposed to be such on account of their white skins, as the idea and emblem of white was purity and spirituality among the Cherokees, were taken to be such. Tobacco, which had been purified and called the cola of peace, was also brought, together with pipes, and the strangers were asked to smoke with the clans. Then the white strangers, which were supposed to be visitors from heaven, and who were supposed to be such on account of their white skins, as the idea and emblem of white was purity and spirituality among the Cherokees, were taken to be such, asked that they be allowed a small piece of ground upon which to camp, cook, and sleep. It was charitably granted. These strangers were entertained by the Cherokee clans very charitably, and food and other articles of comfort freely given to them. Then these strangers made known their desire and willingness to remain with the native Cherokee clans, if they were allowed to purchase a small piece of ground upon which to camp and sleep. They made known to the tribe that they only needed a small piece of land about the size of a bull hide. This modest request was freely granted to the strangers and sold to them for a trifling consideration. The supposed heavenly strangers then cut one of the ox hides which they brought with them into a small string which they stretched around a square enclosing several hundred square yards. This they claimed to be in accordance with the purchase agreement to which the tribe finally agreed, saying at the same time that they had been deceived. Other purchases of land were made for which a consideration was always given by